Hi guys, this is Lauren with Lauren Watkins Art, and today I'm going to be reviewing the Giorgione colored pencils. This set was sent to me from Grabie, a company and website that sells affordable art supplies. Links and more information about Grabie are in the description box below. Even though they sent me these supplies, my review and opinion about these pencils are completely my own. So I was actually in the middle of retiling our bathroom when these arrived, and being the procrastinator that I am, I took this as an opportunity to take a break from tiling to check out new art supplies because I am a sucker for new art supplies. So I unpackaged them and I really liked the red of this tin. I know that doesn't affect the quality of the pencils, but I really liked this red color. And I opened them up and took a look inside to see what these pencils were like. The tin and packaging is pretty standard, but I did notice the tray was a little flimsy that the pencils are on. So you have to be careful pulling them in and out because your pencils will go flying, as you see. And I probably wouldn't move the pencils around by just their plastic tray because I would be worried about them falling out. Once I saw that all the pencils were in good condition and was done checking them out, I got back to work to tiling and started thinking about what I would create with these pencils. So a few days and a fresh manicure later, I got to work testing out these pencils. And if you know me, you know that means starting off with swatches. I always swatch my supplies when I first get them. That's just the way I like to introduce myself to a new supply. If you don't like swatching, you don't have to. I'm kind of doing it for you in this video. But I always swatch my supplies at least on one type of paper, but for this video, I chose to swatch them on two different types of paper. So this first paper I'm swatching on is Arches Hot Press watercolor paper. This is a very smooth textured paper. I wanted to see how well these pencils deposit color on a very smooth surface instead of something that has a lot of grit or texture to it. I also wanted to get an idea of how well these colors work in the sense of like texture, pigmentation, color selection, and all of that. So I tried it out on this paper and I found that it laid down color really well. Very smooth application. There wasn't a lot of grit to the pencils or hard spots. And here is the color swatch on the hot press paper. I particularly liked the pale pinks and peaches and the dark blues, like an ultramarine blue that's really dark and a Prussian blue that's really dark. So I really like that in this set. The second type of paper I swatched on is sanded paper. This is UArt sanded paper. And the reason I'm swatching on a sanded paper is because that is where I typically use my colored pencils, especially when I'm using them in mixed media. So oftentimes I'll do like a watercolor underpainting and then pan pastels and then my colored pencils. And then if I need any kind of extra coverage or pigmentation or anything like that, then I might throw in some pastels over the top. So I wanted to see how these worked on sanded paper. But the thing with sanded paper is they can give you a false sense of texture and pigmentation because there is so much grit to the sanded paper that it grabs on and holds on to that color so well that you don't always get an idea of how saturated a color really is, thus sampling it on two different types of paper. Here is a close-up of the pencils, and one of my favorite things about these pencils is the shape. It's like a rounded triangular shape, and it is so comfy to hold in your hands. They're not a thick, huge pencil like some of the Derwents are. I would say they're pretty average size, but that triangular shape feels very, very comfortable in your hand, at least with the way I hold pencils. I've always liked triangular pencils and pens, and I buy them whenever I find them. I have a permanent indent on my left middle finger because of the way I hold my pencil, and my hand cramps up and gets tired after drawing for a lot of hours, and I find the shape very helpful for that. After swatching the colors, I started playing with the pencils. I wanted to see what kind of gradients I could get, and how well I could blend them with other pencils and the fine lines and details I could get, how well they sharpened, all of that. The type of paper I'm working on is Strathmore drawing paper. It's just in a sketchbook setup. And this paper has more texture than the ultra smooth watercolor paper. That's why you can see more of those like white specks showing through. And it's just something to keep in mind. The type of paper or canvas you're working on, whether it's watercolor or pastel or colored pencil, makes a huge impact on how your other supplies are going to perform, like your paints and pencils. So just keep that in mind. This paper offers a lot of that traditional texture that you think of when you think of colored pencils. But I found these pencils blended really, really nicely. I could get soft gradients. I tried several pencils with it. I tried blending 2 different colors together, a really dark orange and a yellow, to see if I could get a good transition of color between the two and make a lighter orange color by layering them on top of each other. And I could. It worked really well with these pencils. It's really important for your pencils to be able to do gradients and also layer on top of each other well. With paints, you have a palette to mix the colors together on to make a custom color. With pastels, you can blend the colors physically on your paper to create a custom color. With pencils, the only way you're really going to blend them without using something like Gamsol is by layering them. And these colors layered really nicely. I could do a lot of layers with them. And that allows you to get really soft gradients and create custom colors. So if you are needing to create a very specific color, you can layer multiple pencils on top of each other to create that custom color. And that's what I'm doing in this blue section, is I have 3 different pencils that I start layering on top of each other to create that custom color. Part of what allows these colors to blend so well together and allow you to make custom colors is the fact that these are an oil-based pencil. So they don't have as much wax in them as like a Prismacolor pencil. And the oil in them allows them to have a little bit more transparency. So this means that your color that you did before, when you put a color over the top, that color over the top is going to be affected by what's underneath it, thus allowing you to mix custom colors. This also means that the white in this set isn't very opaque. So if you messed up on a section and you are trying to cover that with a white, or you cover in a highlight and you need to cover it in with white, that pencil isn't going to cover that. You would need something more opaque, like a Prismacolor white pencil. But the white is really good for blending and lightening up a color and adjusting it that way. Here I am seeing how these pencils will work with pastels. This is important to me because that is usually how I use my colored pencils. I typically will use my colored pencils as a base layer before I go over the top with my pastel pencil. So this is what I'm trying with this sphere. I'm doing a base layer with these colored pencils, and then I'll go over with some of my pastel pencils to just do the final tweaks. Another way I use these, which I'll show in a minute, is over the top of pan pastels. And this is a technique commonly used in like YouTube and on Instagram. You'll see artists use the pan pastels underneath because it allows them to fill in an area of color very quickly and to tone that paper a specific tone very, very quickly without spending hundreds of hours and burning through tons of pencils to get it that color. So you can lay down a layer of pastel, pan pastel, and then you can go over the top with your colored pencils. And I wanted to make sure these would work well with that. So you can see I did it with the sphere with the pastel over the top. And now with this cone, I am blending in a base layer with the pan pastels. I'm just blocking in the basic colors. Now I will say this is a very thick layer of pan pastel, but my colored pencils worked perfectly over the top. It did kick up some dust by scraping up some of the pan pastel, but that's to be expected. Using this technique allows you to get those really soft blends of a base color or a background, and then you can come over the top with your colored pencils to fine tune those details and tweak and adjust it. Because with the pan pastels alone, sometimes it can be hard to get those fine details in that help a picture look really sharp and in focus. But using colored pencils alone, it can take hours to fill in a background. So this is a way that you can combine the best of both of those supplies and create some awesome artwork. Then I just sketched in a background on the cone using just some of the pencils I had. I wasn't trying to create a smooth blend with them. I just wanted to layer up some fun colors. Some other things I did with these pencils, I did a mushroom sketch in the sketchbook that I showed you earlier. And I just layered these colors up and I had a lot of fun using it. And then I tried blending it out with Gamsol. And this kind of breaks down the binders and the pigments and allows them to blend on your paper. So both of those were great ways to use these pencils. And remember, I am not 100% expert on colored pencils. I've used them. I use them with my pastels, like mentioned earlier, and I use them in my sketchbook. But there are other artists on YouTube that do fantastic pencil work, and they have skills that I marvel at. But this is going to be our main picture we're going to focus on for today. And what I did with this picture was I did a watercolor background on sanded paper. So I just did a base layer of watercolor just to start blocking in some of those textures and shadows and the colors. And then once that dried completely, I started coming in with my colored pencils. I chose not to use pastels with this piece because I didn't want the results to be muddied too much by outside factors like pastels. I felt safe using the watercolor because it's not a super strongly pigmented thing, and it's a technique I would use even with colored pencils on their own. So I am just blocking in the shadows and the highlights that I see in the leaf and on the rock, just very quickly blocking in those details using these pencils. And they lay down really, really nicely, and I can quickly start to have this picture take shape. So as I am finishing blocking in the base layer of colors for this picture, let's talk about the facts and details. These pencils have a 3.3 millimeter core. So the core itself, that is the color of the pencil, is 3.3 millimeters. To give you some perspective, the Faber-Castell Polychromos pencils are a 3.8 millimeter lead, but they are also a lot more money. Just something to keep in mind. They are SV bonded, which is something that Faber-Castell does with their pencils. And this means that the whole core is glued when it is put inside of the wood casing. So there's not just little patches of glue, the whole core is glued in. And what this does is it makes your pencil a lot more durable, so it's less prone to breakage, like if the pencil drops, and it sharpens better because the core isn't as prone to like twisting in the pencil. And that is what you want in your pencil. There is very few things more frustrating in art is when your supplies are like crumbling and breaking before you even get a chance to use them. I've had a few pencils that I think were broken when I got them because they just fell apart and broke every time I sharpened them. And these sharpened fantastically. They weren't so soft that you couldn't get a fine point. I just used my X-Acto School Pro electric sharpener, which even has a triangle setting on it, and I just popped it in and it sharpened these to a fantastic point. The case for these pencils recommends the Faber-Castell pencil sharpener, so if you already have it, that is a good option for you, but they sharpened really well. Quick update about the painting. So I blocked in the base layer of color, and now I am blending out that base layer of color using a soft tool, which is a tool that you use with pastels. And The oil-based pencils blend, especially on sanded paper, pretty well. So I blended it out and got that base layer of color in, and now I'm starting to do another layer of detail. I'm blocking in more shadows, highlights, that kind of stuff. I'm not focusing on fine lines and getting like finishing details in. I'm just blocking in the next layer of color. Something to remember as you are working on a picture, it doesn't matter if it's colored pencils or painting or whatever, every picture is going to go through an ugly duckling stage where it looked better the previous layer, and then the layer you just added feels like you almost ruined it or made it worse. Keep working on your picture. Don't give up on those ugly stages. Keep layering it up. That is a natural part of the process. But if you keep at it, keep looking at your reference photo, taking a break when you're feeling frustrated, there's two things that can happen. One, it gets really good and you get a piece you like. Two, you used up those supplies and you learned from them. I've had some pictures that never really turned out, but by finishing them and taking it to completion, I learned what I liked and what I didn't like and what I would do differently on the next piece. So don't just crumple up your picture and throw it away. Keep working on it and try and finish it, because worst case scenario, it's a learning opportunity. But usually it gets better as you work. And that is something I have to remind myself of all the time when I'm working. So after completing another layer of colored pencil, I am blending that out again using the soft tool. The soft tool is like a palette knife with a dense sponge that kind of slides over it, and you can use it to apply things like pan pastels, or you can use it to blend out pastels, or in this case, oil-based colored pencils. The ability for oil-based colored pencils to be able to blend using like a tool like this is one of the reasons I love them so much with my day-to-day work. They don't blend as easily as like a pastel, but they are a lot more forgiving and able to blend so much easier than your typical wax-based pencil. In the past, the oil-based pencils I've used are the Faber-Castell Polychromos pencils. I would say those are probably the most famous or popular oil-based colored pencil. The Derwent Lightfast pencils are an oil-based pencil, and I've heard that the Pablo Caran d'Ache pencils are also oil-based. Those are really expensive pencils. For comparison, the Faber-Castell set of 60 pencils sells on Dick Blick for $138 for just 60 pencils. On other websites, it's closer to $170, $180. The Giorgone colored pencils, for comparison, sell for $50 full price on Grabie's website for the set of 72, and they're often on sale. So right now, looking on their website, they are on sale for 42% off, so $28.99. And that is a big price difference, and that makes these types of art supplies and the things you can create with them more accessible to more people. And I want people to have the opportunity to create and not feel like they're being held back because they can't afford a really expensive brand. And I am not one to like look down my nose on someone that has really expensive stuff, because I do, but I also appreciate quality supplies that don't have the big price tag. So just something to keep in mind. I also have a coupon code if you're interested to try these pencils out or other art supplies from Grabie's website. I don't get a kickback from this. This is just something that can give you a bit of a discount. My coupon code is Lauren15, and you'll just type it into the coupon or code section at checkout. So you can try it out if you are interested in getting these pencils or shopping any of their other supplies. So what are the pros and cons of these pencils? Because that's important to know before you decide to buy. So let's go over some of the cons first. They're labeled as a professional pencil set, which they feel very similar to the Polychromos, which we'll go over in a minute. But they didn't have any like pigment information, so I don't know how Lightfast these colors are, which you really want in your professional pencil work unless you're just going to be scanning it. Also, I've only been able to find the 72 set, so I couldn't find any other size of set, and there was no open stock availability of these pencils. So if you like a color and you use a lot of it, you might not be able to replace it with one of these pencils. You'd have to find that color in another brand of pencil. So that could be a really big issue when you are working professionally and you go through pencils very quickly. Like, I'm not a pencil artist. Most of my work isn't based on colored pencil, and I have bought replacement pencils for my Polychromos sets. So it is important to be able to buy replacement colors of those that you use a lot. And again, the tray wasn't very durable, but that's not really a big deal. At least to me, I don't carry my pencils around by their tray that much. I usually put one in the lid and one in the base if I'm going to move it to a different location without closing it completely. Another nitpick con of these pencils would be some of the reds I wish were a little bit darker or a little bit more variated from the other reds in the set. So I felt like some of the reds were very, very similar. Again, that's just more of a nitpick, not really necessarily a huge pro or con. So what would I say the pros are? So we went through kind of the negatives, but what are the pros? I would say these pencils are very, very affordable. And so if you are just trying to step it up from the color pencils that you can get from your local store, this is a great option. If you are trying to get some nicer supplies for a kid or a teenager that wants to improve their skill with color pencils, this is a really good option. The affordability of these for a very high quality pencil is awesome. It's not going to be as inexpensive as Crayola, but it's kind of the next step up. The pencils are less than $1 a piece by quite a bit. You get really good color selection with these. They come in a nice tin. The trays are a little flimsy, but the tin is very nice. So you have a really good storage option for these. They feel great in your hand. So they're not going to cramp up in your hand as much. Again, I liked drawing for long amounts of times with these pencils better than my really expensive ones. So those are some excellent pros to these pencils. They were really creamy. They were very easily blended together. I would say they're maybe just a smidge more waxy in texture than the Polychromos, but very, very similar when I was testing them side by side. You can sharpen them really well. They don't break. I didn't have any breakage where a big chunk of the lead broke off on these pencils, and I was able to sharpen them in my electric sharpener very, very easily and get a nice fine point. So to me, those are some big pros. So you can see how much progress we've made on this picture. I have layered a lot of darks in on the leaves to help start getting that dimension. I used a lot of burnt sienna colors and magentas and violets to start getting those shadows in on the leaf, those darker red tones. I've used a lot of grays and blues on the rock that it's sitting on. I didn't draw any of the little leaves around this big leaf. I wanted to keep it pretty simple, but I'm just blocking in those shapes, I did pull some of the reddy browns and orangey brown colors into the rock a little bit, just to help create a little bit of color harmony within the piece. And as this picture goes along, you'll see a lot of the colors that I choose and the color scheme I start using does vary from the reference photo. You don't have to follow your reference photo exactly in your picture. If you want to go for super realism, go for it. But I prefer to use my reference photo as a guide, and then I take my picture to wherever I feel like it needs to go. So for this picture, I decided I want to pull a little bit more of blues and purples into the rock, because one, the blue, more gray toned colors will recede visually, and so they'll feel like they are below the leaf. Two, it also plays into the color scheme. So the leaf is very much orange and red and yellow. Well, I wanted to play off the orange in that color scheme and some of the yellow in it by adding a lot of blues and violets to the rock that the leaf is sitting on. Because the blue and the violet are opposite of the yellow and the orange, next to each other, it will make that orange pop more. Even if the blue is very, very subtle, it will just help the orange color pop and help the leaf be the main focus of this picture, which is what I really wanted. I also noticed doing this all with just colored pencil on the sanded paper, you can do a lot of layers on the sanded paper, but you will still run into the issue of filling in the tooth of your paper and eventually creating a wax bloom. So just something to keep in mind. Sanded paper and an oil-based colored pencil isn't going to save you from getting a wax bloom or filling in the tooth of your paper too quickly. It's just going to allow you to do more of those layers while you're working. And if you do get a wax bloom on your paper, a pastel isn't going to really save you. It might deposit a little bit of color, but it's not going to deposit a lot of it. And that was something I really noticed a few years ago when I was experimenting with this technique of using colored pencils with my pastel pencils, is if I did too thick of a layer of colored pencil underneath and filled in the tooth of the paper, there's not going to be anything for my pastels to grab onto, so it won't accept very many layers after that. So just something to keep in mind as you work. You can see that I've really heightened a lot of the contrast, especially surrounding the leaf where it looks like it's a little bit more in the shadow area. This is again to help that leaf pop off the paper and look a little bit more dimensional. Again, I'm not going for super realistic or hyper realism or anything like that. I just wanted to have fun creating a leaf and seeing how I could push it with this art supply I had. And I'm really glad I did the underpainting, because that just helped set the tone and the color story of this picture. And if you haven't ever tried doing a watercolor picture underneath and then doing colored pencils over the top, you're really missing out. You can do it on sanded paper or like watercolor paper, or if you have a like multimedia paper, some kind of paper that can handle like a wet medium, you can use this technique on, where you do watercolor plus your colored pencils. And depending on how you do your watercolor, you could get really hyper realism using that technique. It's similar to artists using like alcohol markers as the base layer and then doing pencil over the top. It's that same concept where you're toning the paper you're working on to help you get that realism. Or you could do something really whimsy and like fun with watercolor, where it's not necessarily following what you're trying to create, but it can create really interesting colors to play off of and things like that. So just something to keep in mind as you're working. So I am almost done with this picture, and I'm really excited with how it turned out, especially since I don't typically work so much with just colored pencils. I'm really proud of this piece. If you like this video, please hit the like button. If you want to see more of what I create, hit that notification bell and subscribe buttons. That way you will be notified when I post. And if you have any questions about these pencils specifically, or just art in general, or anything like that, please leave them down in the down below, and I will do my best to answer them. Again, the links and all information related to these supplies are in the description box below. I hope you have a fantastic day, and I will see you next time. Bye.